This beautiful block here is from an old quilt book called Mrs. Keller's 9-Patch. I have fun with these old quilt books that I find at the thrift store frequently, and I look through and I find blocks that I like and I try to reproduce them with fabric. Here are the 2.5-inch squares. I need 5 of that cute bird fabric and 4 of the dark blue. I also need some background strips. These are 2.5 by 6.5 inches. I need 4 of these to surround the 9-patch. And then I need 8 of these mustard colored squares, 2.5 inches. I also need some 3-inch squares, 2 each of the background fabric and 2 of that mustard gold color. So after I had all of my pieces cut out, I started by putting my 9-patch together using the 2.5-inch squares. All right, the center of my block is complete, and now I'll be adding some triangle corners to these strips. So I'll put right sides together, and I'll be drawing a line from corner to corner, and it should look like this. After I sew down the pencil line, I will open that up and make sure that it covers that triangular area, and then I'll cut away the excess, and I'll do that on both ends of all 4 strips. Now I need to make some half square triangles for the corners of my block, and I'll put right sides together. I'll draw a pencil line again through the center, but this time I'm going to put a seam on both sides of that pencil line, and it's a 1/4 inch seam, sometimes just a little shy of a 1/4 inch, and after putting those 2 seams in, I will cut along the pencil line, open up these half square triangles, and trim them all to 2.5 inches. I'm going to sew my block together in rows. That top row includes those half square triangles and that strip with the triangles on the ends, and the second row has that 9 patch in the center. And then once I have all 3 rows together, I will sew the rows together, trying to make sure that the seams kind of go in opposite directions. I use a 1/4 inch seam. I don't worry too much about which direction my seams are going. It's always best if your darker fabric is not on the white fabric. You know, you don't press towards the lighter fabric, you always press towards the darker fabric. It doesn't always work out. You're not always able to make things come out smooth, and the dark fabric sometimes does have to kind of hide behind that lighter fabric, but most of the time you can get it going in the right direction. And then I will try to get my seams to go opposite directions when I sew this together. When I come to a seam, I want the seams to be going different directions so that they can kind of nestle together. And before you know it, I have a quilt block. This is a really pretty quilt block. It measures 10.5 inches before putting it into a quilt. Here's an idea what it might look like with some sashing. Really pretty. I think it would be even better if all these blocks are just a little bit different to make a scrappy quilt. Here's our beautiful block for today, and it's pretty easy to put together. It just requires some squares. So I have 5 white squares, and I have 32 2-inch squares that are all a variety of those soft, pretty colors. I'm beginning my quilt block by putting together my 4 square in a square blocks using the white 3.5-inch squares, and I'm placing a 2-inch square in that first corner. You can see I drew a pencil line from corner to corner, and I'm putting a seam right on top of the pencil line. I opened up that triangle and I made sure that it was the right size, and now I will cut away that excess fabric behind. Going to go around on each corner and add a 2-inch square, and there will be an overlap of about 1/4 inch. After making all 4 of my square in a square blocks using those scrappy 2-inch squares, I'm going to press them, and I will double check that they all measure 3.5 inches. Now that my first 4 pieces are complete, now all I need to do is make 4 patches using the leftover squares. I have a drawer full of 2-inch squares here in my sewing room, and I dug through there today and pulled out some beautiful colors to put my 4 patches together and my square and a square together. There are a couple duplicates of these fabrics, but I tried to mix it up as much as I could. It's summertime where I live, and I think these colors in this quilt are just perfect for this time of year. I have all of the elements I need for my quilt block now, my 4 patches, my square and a square, and the center square for my quilt block is that white 3.5-inch square. And now I'm going to lay everything out, and then I'll be joining them in rows and then putting the rows together. This is a beautiful scrappy block that will make a wonderful quilt. I haven't decided if the blocks should be next to each other or maybe with a white sashing. I think would also look really nice. I'll add a couple of those pictures towards the end here so you can see what that might look like. Here they are, all placed together. It makes an interesting quilt pattern. And then I also tried it with a white sashing, which I think I prefer. You can really see that quilt block with the white sashing there. Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth. It's always nice to sew along with you. Today I'm taking 2 10-inch squares, and after cutting them and sewing them together, very quickly and easily. I'm going to get 2 quilt blocks and it's going to make a really fun quilt. Let's get started. Here are the squares, the 10-inch squares that I have cut from fabric yardage, and here are the white squares. For this quilt, you really need a constant for that background fabric. You could choose any color, and in this quilt, I chose a white to go along with all of my blue fabrics. And the first thing I did is I put a little mark right in the center, and this can be eyeballed. It does not need to be the exact center of the square. That's just the spot where all of your lines need to intersect. Four lines, and here's a little demonstration of the lines that need to be cut. There needs to be an X going across your square in 2 directions, and I'm using these little strips of fabric to demonstrate where you need to cut, and those 2 X's need to intersect right there in the middle. That's why I drew that little dot in the middle of my fabric. Lines have been cut. You just move every other piece, and in this case I'm moving it up above so that I have room here for 2 blocks. I can lay out my 2 blocks, and then I'm able to piece them together. To make this block, I'll be joining 4 of those sort of pizza slices or pie slices. I'll be joining 4 together, and then I will put the 2 halves together. And as you can see, the points of these little pieces need to hang off about 1/4 of an inch so that your seam will come together nicely. So if there's a long point, it hangs off 1/4 of an inch, and you sew right at the place where they meet. And I have all my pieces together, all my 8 slices together. I pressed, I waited until it was all together. And in this very whimsical style quilt or liberated style quilt, the points will not all come together exactly in the middle or on the sides. When I join my quilt blocks, they will not match up, but I'm not aiming for that, and I just like the way this turns out, and I think it's a really easy way to get the same effect without stressing about things matching up. This quilt block is based on an older quilt block called Light and Dark because of the two quilt blocks you make out of the same fabrics but different placements, and you alternate them in the quilt. This quilt block is just a variation on that, where you just cut those diagonal cuts without measuring. Thought I would show you what happens if you do not have that little pencil dot in the middle. If your lines do not come together in the center, you end up with, this is my mistake, you end up with that little piece in the middle, and so you really can't join the quilt block together very easily. So it's important to draw that little dot in the middle or near the middle. And I also wondered what it would look like if that pencil dot was off to the side. These pieces would sort of be off center, and I think that might make a fun looking quilt as well. The blocks measure about 9 inches when you're done, and when you have all your blocks ready to go, you join them together, alternating the light and the dark, and before you know it, you'll have a quilt. This was a really fun quilt to put together. White and blue are always a great combo. Today's block, it's called December Star. I'll be using a lot of 2-inch squares. I'm also using some 2.5-inch squares for half square triangles. And I'm using red, green, pink, and white. The pink and white are sort of background colors. And for this block, I need a 3.5-inch square. I'll be making half square triangles, so I put my 2.5-inch squares into little groups. I'll need some half square triangles for the first block that are red and green. I need 8 of those. I need 16 pink and whites, so I would need 8 squares to make 16 half square triangles. You always need just half of the amount of half square triangles. Each set of 2 squares makes 2 half square triangles. I need 8 green and white, and I need 8 pink and green for the first block that I'll be making. Now that I have all of my sets separated here, I will put right sides together, and I'll sew on both sides of a pencil line. First I draw a little line from corner to corner, and then I put a seam on both sides of the pencil line, and I cut along the pencil line, I press them open, and then I will trim them all to 2 inches. I'm using a new little ruler that I purchased recently to trim all of my half square triangles to 2 inches. Here is the block before it's been sewn together. I did switch out the center block, the center square there, to a different red print, and when it was all done, I wasn't completely satisfied with the colorway. That outside pink part of the star was just a little bit too light, so I went back and I tried a different combination of colors. I do like the contrast with these colors a little more than the first block I made, but I will be using both blocks in my quilt. This just has two different greens and a red. I'm also using a white in the center and a pink for that outside background fabric. Here's the quilt book I am getting inspiration from today. This Warman's Vintage Quilts. It has pictures of a lot of vintage quilts. It doesn't explain how to make them, but it is very inspirational. This one I thought was simple and pretty with that mustard colored yellow and those red hourglass blocks in the center. Some of those hourglass blocks are repeated in some of the blocks. It's a quirky kind of quilt that I really had fun trying to replicate here today. So I'm using 3-inch squares. There are 4 mustard and 4 cream or white, and then I'll need red and white for those hourglass blocks. The hourglass block, I need 4-inch squares to begin with, so I'll use a background square, 1 4-inch square, and then a red 4-inch square, and with just those 2 squares I'll be able to get an hourglass block. This was a nice red print that was just shy of 4 inches, but since everything is trimmed, I'm going to try using it, and hopefully I'll be able to get to that 3 inches that I need when I trim everything down. To make the hourglass block for each of these quilt blocks, I am using, like I said, those 2 4-inch squares, and I will be able to get 2 hourglass blocks out of just these 2 squares. So you saw me cutting extra for the other blocks in my quilt, but really for just this one block, I only need these 2 pieces of fabric. Drew a pencil line from corner to corner, and I put a seam on both sides, and now I'll press towards the red fabric, and I will put these 2 half square triangles together with opposite fabrics facing each other and try to get that seam nestled nicely in the center there. And then I'm going to be drawing another line from corner to corner. Again, I'll sew on both sides of the line, and then I'll be able to press this open for my hourglass block. made up with 2 hourglass blocks, so I have enough for 2 of my quilt blocks, and I'm going to trim these to 3 inches so they go along with the other pieces in the quilt block. The quilt book that I'm using calls this block the letter X 9 patch on point. I know that some blocks have different names, and I know I've made this block before and it used a different name. It's not coming to me right now, but we have done this block before on my channel. I used it in one of my sampler quilts. I think this block will be a little different because I'll be putting it on point, sort of setting the block on the diagonal. This is a very simple block to make, and all I need to do now is make some more to make this beautiful quilt. And like I said, I'll be setting it on point. I'll use some 8-inch squares alternating with my quilt block. And I don't know if you notice here now, but instead of using that white background for my hourglass block, I'll be using a print just like that quilter long ago used a print for that background fabric, and that will just make this quilt look extra scrappy and kind of fun. So I'm using that sort of a blue plaid print for that center block. Today's block is called 5 Diamonds. It's a beautiful 9 patch using 5 squares that are 3.5 inches to make the diamonds, and I have 20 little 2-inch squares. I also have 2 gold squares that are 4-inch and 2 of the background that are 4-inch. So first thing I'm going to do is to make that diamond shape or that square in a square block, and I'm using the little 2-inch squares in each of the corners of my 3.5 square red pieces I have here. So I put a seam corner to corner, and if I fold it open, it should follow along with that background area. And this is an easy way to get an exact 3.5-inch square in a square block. There is some waste as you cut away those little triangles. If you like, you can sew an extra seam and save those little triangles. Mine measured just shy of 1.5 inches, so they're pretty tiny. So if you prefer to do that, I did one here just for an example. After getting those first 2 corners covered with a triangle, on this first one I'm finger pressing just to save a little time, but in the following blocks I'm going to take all of them over to my ironing board. So after doing the first 2 triangles, I'm going to cover the last 2 corners of this 3.5 inch square. Make sure that it is fitting correctly, and then I'll trim away the excess and I'll press it open, and when I'm done I should have a square and a square block that's 3.5 inches, and I need to make 5 of these for our block today. After getting my first 5 elements ready for my quilt block, I went to my 4-inch squares, and I'm using gold, this mustard color, for the outside half square triangles, and I will draw a pencil line from corner to corner. I'm going to sew on both sides of my pencil line. I'll cut along the pencil line, I'll press it open, and then I'll need to trim my half square triangles to 3.5 inches. This is such a beautiful block. It would be a really pretty quilt just to have this deep red and gold or mustard color, but I thought it would be fun to try and use some more fall colors in my quilt. So I added some green and blues and browns, and every block in my quilt will be just a little bit different. These quilt blocks are going to make a beautiful fall-inspired quilt with all these warm colors. Today's block, called Birds in the Air, begins with some 9 patches, and these 9 patches are made with 2.5-inch squares. This block, I also need some strips, 2.5-inch wide, 2 that are 6.5, and 2 strips that are 10.5 inches long. And then I'll be using some green Scrappy fabric for the leaves on this beautiful block. This block also has some applique, and today I'm using light steamacine 2. I'll leave a link below. It's available on Amazon. So the first thing I did was I added those strips to my 9 patch blocks here. I'm using a 2.5-inch square index card to make my pattern. This will give me an idea of how big to make my leaf. So I laid it on my quilt to get an idea of how big I wanted my leaf to be. I drew one side of that leaf, and now I'm going to cut along that pencil line and test it out and see if this is the size that I want for my quilt block, and I think it is going to be a good size. So this will be my pattern to use on my light steamacine. I kind of opened that steamacine a little bit. It's a two-sided, there's 2 papers, and one of the papers has the glue side on it. So I want to be drawing my pattern on the side that has the glue. I need 12 leaves for each block, so I am tracing them onto my steamacine very close together. I'll just be cutting right along that pencil line when I cut my leaves out. Now that I have 12 leaves ready to go, I found a green scrap, and as you can see, those leaves are not going to fit on my scrap, so I need to cut them apart so they will fit on this strip of fabric. After getting the leaf section the right size, I found the sticky side of my steam seam here, and I'm going to lay the sticky side down on the back of my fabric. After pressing the steam seam down, it doesn't take long to get it pressed onto the fabric. I took a pair of scissors and just followed along that line and cut out my leaves here, and then I will be removing the last paper. There's still a paper on the back, and I'll remove that little piece of paper, get all of my leaves placed where I want them, and then I'll press one more time. This is such a beautiful block, and I have one more thing to do before it's complete. I need to zigzag, so I had to go to my old Singer, one of my first sewing machines that has a zigzag stitch, and this is one I don't use often, but I do enjoy using it. And like I said, I think I've had it for almost 40 years. This is one of the first machines I purchased as an adult, and I put the zigzag stitch on this machine, a very small stitch, and I'm using a thread that matches the leaves, and I'm going to zigzag around each of those green leaves. Since each of my red 9-patch blocks are different reds, I thought it would be fun to also vary the green leaves on each of my blocks. Red and green is such a classic combo. It can be used all year long, or maybe it'll be a Christmas quilt. Thanks for joining me today along memory lane with some of my favorite quilt blocks. I'll see you next time.